In this discussion, we are going to take a look at another perspective in understanding the self, and for today, we are going to talk about the physical self. Okay, I would guess that my students, other than this subject, you're also taking other subjects that might have discussed the physical self, and today we're going to integrate what you know so far about the body and look at how does your body, how does your physical self play a role in defining who you are. Okay? And you may learn about the physical self from various sources of information. Say, for example, you will learn about this in physical education, you will learn about this in other subjects, about anatomy, physiology, biology, etc. Okay, but for today, I'm going to talk about the self in a way that we will see how does our perception of our body affect how we think of ourselves. Okay, that's why this is entitled as physical self. Now, let's begin by taking a look or reflecting at the different conceptualizations of beauty according to the philosophers. Okay, until today, beauty is a word that we use in our day-to-day conversation. If something is nice, then we say that what we have done is beautiful. Okay? If someone has good character, we would say that that person is beautiful inside and outside. Okay? If something is ordered, if something is good, other than the word perfect, sometimes we use the word beautiful. Okay? And we have different definitions of beauty. But now let's take a look at how do the philosophers define beauty. Okay? So beauty traditionally was among the ultimate values along with goodness, truth, and justice. Okay? So even back then, beauty is already something that was being emphasized as something that we should try to preserve or something that we should try to enhance. This is not to say that back then people were so attuned into physical beauty, because it doesn't say here that they're only talking about the beauty of the physical self, but rather they may be talking about the beauty of the being or the character of the person. One example is that Saint Augustine asked whether things were beautiful because it gave delight, or whether it gave delight because it was beautiful. Do we think that person A is beautiful because he or she did something good? Or is person A good because he or she is beautiful? St. Augustine, later on, he believed the latter, believing that things gave delight because it was beautiful. Hence, by saying this, it's like he is also saying that things are not inherently delightful, but rather things are inherently beautiful. Okay? And because of that beauty, things became desirable. Okay? We do not say that something is beautiful just because it is something desirable for us, but rather it's the other way around. First, we perceive the beauty of the being, okay, of the character, before we say that it is delightful. Okay? Other than that, Plato has connected beauty to love and desire. So maybe this was the beginning of the thinking that if something is beautiful, then it's worthy of love and it's also desirable. Hence, we don't do things that is not desirable. Okay, we don't do things that are not lovable because that's not beautiful. Okay, so other than that, Aristotle asserted that the chief forms of beauty are order, symmetry, and definiteness. Okay, so from the different perspectives of the philosophers, we can say that beauty can be a characteristic of an object. It can also be a characteristic of a person. It can also be a characteristic of a situation. Just like in the perspective of Aristotle, it something is beautiful if it's orderly. That's why there are people who pay attention to order, to perfection, to organization. Okay, because that's how they find beauty or delight in something. Okay, so those are the philosophical perspectives in understanding beauty. Now let's look at other possible conceptualizations of beauty, but still according to philosophers. One, according to David Hume, is that beauty is no quality in things themselves, okay, but rather it exists merely in the mind which contemplates them. Okay, so if earlier I told you that one perspective emphasizes the beauty of things, it's something that is inherent. Now we're taking a look at another perspective, saying that beauty is not a quality of the thing itself, but rather beauty is something that is perceived by the perceiver. Hence, what is beautiful for me may not be beautiful for you, and we have different definitions of what is beautiful and what is not. Okay, so in layman's term, this is where the quote, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, came from. Okay, another perspective here by Francis Hutcheson is that the perception of beauty does not depend on the external sense of sight. Okay, so beauty is something beyond what we see. Sometimes beauty is what we feel, beauty is what we sense. Okay, like for example, when you hear music and it's beautiful music. And when you feel good, that's a beautiful feeling. Okay, hence we should not limit the philosophical definition of beauty to the physical characteristic of the object. Beauty can be attached, can be used to describe situations. It can be used to describe, um, it can be used to describe sensations or feelings. Okay, so when was the last time you have felt good? Okay, and maybe during the last time that you have felt good, say for example, you felt good after helping, you also think that helping is beautiful. Okay, so what we can see is that there are different ways to define beauty as a virtue. Okay, it may be characteristic of the thing itself. It may also be the characteristic. It may also be a perception. It Beauty can be a subjective concept. Okay, hence every culture have their own definition of what is beautiful and what is not. So if you appear to be beautiful in one culture, then perhaps you're not beautiful or not as beautiful if you are exposed to another culture. This is also dangerous because what if the definition of beauty in one culture is not not inclined with what is achievable, or not inclined with what is doable? Say for example, what if in your culture you define something as beautiful if something or someone is physically attractive? Okay, and we have different ways of defining what physically attractive means, and we're going to take a look at that in the next few slides. Now let's take a look at what does psychology have to say about beauty. Okay, so does it pay to be attractive, or does it pay to groom yourself in an attractive manner? Does it pay to, you know, fix the way you look? Does it pay to look good? Does it pay to dress well? Okay, does it pay that people have good opinions about your attractiveness? Okay, so let's take a look at the psychological perspective here. Okay, so according to psychological research, a person who is perceived as attractive makes more money than a person below average looks. Okay, so what I would like to highlight from this is that this is a correlational research, and if you like research, you would understand what correlational research means. And if you want more about that, I have another lecture in another subject about research. Okay, so if you want to learn more about psychological research, feel free to check that video. But going back to this, if this is a correlational research, I want to emphasize to you that it's not their looks that causes their high income. It's not a direct relationship, but rather it's important for you to know as early as now that if things are related to each other, then there may be other things or other factors that we should consider. Okay? what another message that I would like to tell you is that do not generalize this finding to all situations. Do not think that all people who are of average, below average or average looks are less likely to make money, because there again there are other factors to consider. This result may not be true in our culture, or it may not be true in your environment. Okay, so it may differ according to situations. But in general, okay, psychological research would say that persons or people who are perceived as attractive make more money compared to those who are of below average looks. And let's take into account the other factors here. Okay, perhaps those who are more attractively looking are given more opportunities. Okay, maybe other people perceive that if someone is attractive, then he or she is more likely to be talented as well. Okay, that's an issue for another day. That's why we emphasize as psychology professionals that we must not just look at the physical attractiveness of the person, but we should assess the other skills of the individual. Okay? Other than that, in politics, voters who are not actively engaged in social and political issues choose candidates based on looks. And we know that this happens a lot. Okay, typically, when voters do not have an idea about politics, or they don't know much, they're not political literate, then they're going to select someone who is physically attractive. Okay? That's why we are drawn to people who have good charisma, who communicate well, who are well groomed, because these are our different standards of being attractive. Okay? So what I would like you, the message I want you to receive is this. Okay? Try to present yourself in a manner that will help you advance your career. Okay? Sometimes that can be as little as show of being presentable in your initial job interview, or becoming more confident about the way that you deliver yourself, or simply um fixing wearing the right clothes, or being presentable. That helps a lot. Okay, because believe it or not, okay, if we are perceived as attractive, opportunities may come along the way, and we are not conscious about it all the time. Okay, that does not happen all the time, but it's good that with these research results, you know that being prepared, being physically attractive, or being someone who shows good skills, someone who is confident, it pays. Okay, when eventually in your career. So why does that happen? It's because we have this psychological phenomenon known as the halo effect. Okay? And when does halo effect phenomenon, when do we observe this phenomenon? Typically, this happens when we try to evaluate individuals. Okay, and by definition, the halo effect is the tendency of people to rate attractive individuals more favorably for their personality traits or characteristics compared to those who are less attractive. Here's another way to think of it. So if someone is physically attractive, then you jump to conclusions that he or she is also smart, he or she is also skilled, or he or she is also capable. Okay, he or she may be the perfect candidate. Imagine you were able to jump to that conclusion just because of physical looks. Okay, and not all people are conscious about this. That's why we encourage students to make yourselves presentable when you apply for a job. Make yourself look confident. Sometimes fake it till you make it helps. Okay, that's why you need to prepare ahead of time when you make presentations, when you when you speak in public. Okay, because people are not conscious about halo effect. Okay, and sometimes if someone wants to persuade us, then they make themselves look presentable so that we will jump to the conclusion that this person also knows what he or she is talking about. Okay? The other side of the equation is what we call the horn effect or the devil effect. Okay? And when we say that there is such thing as devil effect, we give low ratings to a person just because of one negative attribute. Say, for example, if person A is not a good English speaker, then there's a tendency for you to think that he is not intelligent, he is not capable, or he is not confident. He is not responsible, even though responsibility may or may not be connected to English speaking skills. Okay, so this I hope you become more conscious about the way that you evaluate people, because sometimes we jump to conclusions about the skills of the individual merely by just observing how they look physically. Okay, so let us try to be more objective in the way that we rate people so that we won't be affected by either halo or the devil effect. Now let's take a look at another perspective in understanding beauty. And this time, let's take a look at the perspective of culture and cultural psychology. Okay? And culture affects what we label as desirable, what we label as good, but definitely it also affects what we label as beautiful. Okay? And cultural traditions can either have a positive or negative influence on body image and on self-esteem. Okay? So, in various cultures, we have different ideals. We promote different images. We try to look for certain characteristics because we think that the presence of these characteristics defines what is characterizes beauty. Okay? So, a culture may promote certain ideal standards of body sizes, and these may be culturally specific. Okay, say for example, a certain culture may pay attention to the shape of the nose, to the shape of the lips, okay, or to the amount of muscle mass in the body, to the amount of body fat, okay, to the length of the feet. It differs for every culture. What are our standards of beauty? But the bottom line is this: our cultural traditions may influence us to have a negative take, or to have a negative um, may influence us to paint a very inaccurate picture of what a beautiful person is. Say for example, look at this tradition. Okay, among Chinese, it is they define that having a small foot, having small feet is one of the standards of beauty. Okay, and I would guess that as time goes by, there are people who have raised their concerns about the negative implications of such practices. Okay, because we're talking about physical self here, we're also talking about health. Okay, so if we endorse a certain characteristic as beautiful, it may also be dangerous to your health, especially if we are now talking about body weight. Americans have emphasized thinness. Filipinos have emphasized dieting and body appearance, particularly having a fair skin. But Westerners, they think that it's more desirable to have a tan skin. Okay, so now we can see that what is beautiful for them may not be labeled as beautiful in our culture because we have different standards of beauty. And sometimes we want to think what we label as beautiful because it is not congruent with our culture. Okay? People experience body dissatisfaction due to cultural standards. Sometimes these cultural standards are absurd. Okay? Sometimes they are not doable. Okay? Sometimes we want to try our best to be in the average weight, to be above average in height. Okay? Because we think that when we achieve such goals, we are going to be happy. Okay? But in our journey in trying to achieve these goals, we end up being unhappy. Guess what? In psychological research, it was found out that people with problems with eating, problems with the body, some of them may have perfectionistic tendencies. That's why even though they are already unhealthy in their diet, they keep on dieting because they want to be perfect in their diet. Until they achieve their quote and unquote perfect weight, they won't stop. There are people um, who get plastic surgery for physical attractiveness, yet they are not satisfied with the results of that intervention. That's why they will go for another surgery, even though it's no longer necessary. We're going to talk about those things in the next few slides. As part of our subject in understanding the self, and as a psychology professional, I have incorporated mental health and mental illness in understanding the self. Hence, I'm going to talk about some psychological disturbances that will help you understand the experiences of other people, especially those who suffer from such disturbances. But it doesn't mean that after listening to this lecture that you will have the right or you will have the right skill to diagnose yourself, because only mental health professionals, psychologists and psychiatrists can diagnose. Okay, so this lecture is not made for self-diagnosis. Okay, the first disorder that I want to talk about in relation to physical self is the body dysmorphic disorder. And when we say that a person has body dysmorphic disorder, he or she may suffer from what we call imagined ugliness, or a preoccupation with some imagined defect in appearance by someone who actually looks reasonably normal. So imagine looking at someone who doesn't look ugly, someone who looks normal. However, in his or her perception, he thinks that he is ugly, hence he's going to do something about his imagined ugliness. Okay? And that imagined ugliness is not even objective ugliness, but rather it is subjective. Okay? It may come from previous experiences wherein that person may have been bullied, that he was ugly, even though he's not. He may have been exposed to social media or to videos, to other people who post in the internet saying that if you have a certain characteristic, you're ugly. That's why we want to guide people in their definition of what is beautiful. Okay? So people with imagined ugliness may do something with their perceived defects. And sometimes their strategies are not so healthy. Say, for example, there's one case in abnormal psychology, one of the subjects in psychology, wherein the person is disturbed by his or her pimples. And because he thinks that the pimples are making him ugly, what he did is that he used nail cutter to remove those pimples. So, what I'm trying to say is this: people with body dysmorphic disorder, they may do whatever, they may resort to any method just to quote and unquote eliminate their perceived ugliness, but sometimes they end up looking worse because of their misguided strategies. Here's another example. In another book in abnormal psychology, there was one case wherein it was highlighted the person has fats in the sides of the body, in the sides of the stomach, in the sides of the tummy. And then what he did was that he used a knife to remove those excess body fats. So their strategies in order to make themselves feel better is not healthy after all. There are some people who would go to plastic surgeons again and again. And if you're a greedy plastic surgeon, you will keep entertaining the request of that person because it gives you or it brings you money. Okay? But if you're a responsible physician, here's what you're supposed to do. Do not continue entertaining the request of that person, but rather refer the person to a mental health professional because the disturbance is not physical but rather it is psychological. And we want people to think to be satisfied. We want people to be satisfied with how they look without the need for excessive interventions. Okay? If you know someone with imagined ugliness or with body dysmorphic disorder, or if you know someone who has troubles in with their physical attractiveness and you think that those problems are serious, maybe it would help if you will refer them to a mental health professional. Not because they necessarily have a body dysmorphic disorder, but rather we just want the person to feel more confident about himself or herself. This time, let's talk about eating disorders. There are three major eating disorders in abnormal psychology. The first one is bulimia nervosa. If you have bulimia nervosa, you engage in out of control eating or binges. And then, in order to maintain your desired weight, what you do is that you induce self vomiting, or you try to take laxatives, or you try of other methods to purge or to get rid of the food. Hence, even though they eat a lot of food, they stay in their desired shape. Okay? That's not healthy because eventually, just think of the nutrition that this person is taking in. He or she will not have enough macro or micronutrients because this person is purging. How is he supposed to eat healthily or to get the right nutrients if he or she is continually purging? The situation is worse among those with anorexia nervosa. The behaviors of those with bulimia nervosa is similar to those with anorexia nervosa. However, the difference is that people with anorexia nervosa are underweight. Their body weight drops dangerously in an unhealthy manner. So they are what how can we say that it's anorexia nervosa than bulimia nervosa? A person with anorexia nervosa is someone who is underweight. A person with bulimia nervosa can have normal weight or he or she can also be overweight. Okay? A person with anorexia nervosa may try his or her best to continue being underweight because that's what's perfect, quote and unquote, perfect for him or her. And guess what? A lot of people are committing suicide or are hurting themselves because of eating disorders. That's why we should pay more attention to mental health because this is not just about body weight and eating, this is also about being satisfied with how you look. Some people may have binge eating disorders or they may binge repeatedly and they find it distressing. They feel guilty about their binges, but they need help in controlling their eating behavior. Okay, because they are not they don't have the right psychosocial skills to simply stop the binge eating behavior. Hence, we should refer them to mental health professionals. Okay, they may need counseling or other types of intervention for them to get better. Okay, to end this lecture, let me speak about the various sources of an eating disorder. So there are biological, psychological, and social influences. Different mental disorders are not just psychological, they're also biological. Okay? People with eating disorder may have inherited vulnerability, meaning their parents may also have suffered from psychological stress. Their parents may also have suffered from psychological disturbances. And if you have a parent who is vulnerable to psychological disturbances, then you are also more likely to be vulnerable to such disturbances. Okay? Other than that, they may also have, let's also consider the psychological factors. Okay, what if this person is suffering from another disorder? Say, for example, he is prone to anxiety or depression, and those disorders may be connected to his or her anxiety about weight or weight gain. Okay? So their way of dealing with their anxiety is by restricting their food intake. There are also social influence. Like, what if in their family or in their country, there's a desire to be thin or sometimes pressure to be thin? Okay? And these different factors, all of them predict restrictions in eating. And eventually, if they are continuous, you will eventually develop eating disorders. They can be anorexia or bulimia. Okay, and earlier I described to you the differences between these. Okay, the difference is that those with bulimia nervosa, their behavior is composed of binging, purging to reduce the anxiety. Okay, to feel good about their weight, they binge it or they eat a lot and then they purge. On the other hand, those with anorexia nervosa, they may also binge purge, but some of them, they don't binge, but rather they engage in continued restriction. They eat in, let's say, lower than 500 calories just to think or just to stay thin. And their way of reducing their anxiety is unhealthy. It's not bad to address anxiety, and it's not bad to be anxious because anxiety is a normal response to an abnormal situation. But sometimes our strategy of dealing with anxiety is not healthy for us, both physically and mentally. So I hope, my students, you don't have any problems when it comes to body weight, you don't have any problems when it comes to eating. And this is not to say that I don't want you to engage in proper diet, but rather I want you to diet or I want you to stay healthy, not because you want to conform to the society, but rather I want you to stay healthy physically and mentally for the sake of good health. Not to be accepted, not because of the pressure to be thin, but because stay healthy for your physical health, for you to avoid different illnesses, and for you to live a long and healthy life. That's it for this discussion, and thank you for listening. Let's talk about other topics in the next few discussions.